As you learned previously, archaeology is often subdivided into prehistoric and historic archaeology. What separates these two subfields is whether or not there is a written context contemporary to the artifacts being studied. However, as I noted, an archaeologist can also study present-day material culture, as you read in the Garbage Project Revisited. I would also like to draw your attention to the chronology that you see in front of you. You will notice that it's divided into the Paleolithic, the Neolithic, the Ancient Age, the Medieval Age, Modern Age, and Contemporary Age. The terms that are used with regard to these different periods could be different depending on which chronology that you're looking at. For example, the Ancient Age could be divided into the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. There could be the Dark Ages, or medieval period, the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, uh, and then of course the Modern Age can varies depending on the source that you're reading, when that actually begins or not begins. Usually around 1492, in that period, you start getting into the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, and the Age of Enlightenment, and of course into the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution, and really and truly what is the modern period, or our contemporary period. However, I would like to point out something significant. Each of these periods, whether it's the Paleolithic or Neolithic or the Bronze Age, for example, they do not happen at the same time everywhere. In other words, some geographical areas may be in the Paleolithic while others are in the Neolithic. I'll give you a specific example. When the Eastern Mediterranean world entered the Bronze Age, for example, like in ancient Egypt, and they had writing and they were building megalithic structures and they were using stone tools, the central Mediterranean, for the most part, uh, was still in the Neolithic period. Many places were still predominantly only using stone tools, no metal tools. In fact, in the case of the island of Malta, uh, most of the central Mediterranean, when it did enter the Bronze Age, Malta was still only using stone tools, technically putting it in, keeping it in the Neolithic period. So the Neolithic, when the Neolithic begins, or when the Bronze Age begins, or when the Iron Age begins, it really depends on the culture and the region that you're studying. These periods can begin and end at different times and different places. There are many types of archaeology, too. It can be said that archaeology can be multidisciplinary in nature, borrowing from other disciplines like biology, geology, botany, chemistry, zoology, physics, psychology, astronomy, and others. It is often said that the archaeologist plunders from these other disciplines their methods and theories so that they can be used to analyze and interpret the material culture of ancient and present cultures and societies. As you could see in the slide, there are several different types of specialties in archaeology, like paleoarchaeology, which these archaeologists pretty much focus on the Paleolithic period and human remains and culture that are older. There's the classical archaeologist who pretty much focuses on Roman and Greek period civilization. There's the historical archaeologist, or the archaeologist that predominantly focuses on human remains, the osteologist. There's forensic archaeologists who study current day human remains and burial sites. And in many ways, the archaeologist is a forensic scientist in general. There's also landscape archaeologists. These archaeologists study the environment and the landscape, the context in which the artifacts are found in. Changes in the landscape can give clues to how a society adapts and changes over time. Often, when people read some of my archaeological work, they think, well, it doesn't sound like you're an archaeologist. It sounds like you're a chemist or a mathematician, because most of the work that I do is in the lab. Some archaeologists are what I would call lab archaeologists, and others are field archaeologists. I have been in the field, but most of what I do is lab work. I analyze and study the artifacts in the material culture after they've been excavated from an archaeological site. That area of archaeology is called archaeometry, or the archaeological sciences. And in archaeometry, we use scientific techniques borrowed from geology and chemistry and biology to analyze artifacts, to study them, to study how they were made, to study where the raw materials may have come from, to put together uh, a narrative about the artifact based on the scientific data. Another growing area in archaeology is acoustic archaeology, or the archaeology of sound. These archaeologists study the way sound may have been constructed within archaeological space, the spaces that were constructed by ancient people. And they try to recreate the sounds or study the frequencies of vibrations, the way sound bounces off the walls of a monument or enclosure or structure, in order to gain some knowledge about the way the space was used or the types of sounds that the ancient people would have employed within that space. Another area in archaeology is archaeoastronomy. Archaeoastronomy involves studying the relationship people had with the sky in ancient times. The archaeoastronomist will investigate how different structures or monuments or burial sites were aligned within the landscape in relationship to different stars or different events such as the winter or summer solstice. A famous theory involves the pyramids in Egypt, specifically the three pyramids on the Giza Plateau. It is believed that these three pyramids are aligned to the three stars found in Orion's belt, not just in terms of their position as Orion is rising in the east, but also in terms of its general layout, corresponding to the layout of the stars found in the sky. Additionally, the sizes of the pyramids correspond with the general sizes of the stars, interestingly enough. And this analysis has raised some interesting theories about ancient beliefs in Egypt too. Uh, Orion, the constellation of Orion in ancient times for the ancient Egyptians was represented Osiris. And often the three stars in Orion's belt were considered a gateway into the Duat, the gateway into heaven. Interestingly enough, I don't know if any of you have been reading in the news lately, the star Betelgeuse, which, if you could look at the cursor on the screen, is the star right here in the shoulder of Orion. And it has been dimming lately. Um, it is believed that it potentially has even gone supernova. If it has gone supernova, we may not know about it until 600 years from now. It takes about 600 years for the light from Betelgeuse to reach Earth. But we have seen changes within the intensity of the star and also within its shape over the past year, indicating that it may be at the end of its life cycle. Uh, and some have speculated that it may have already gone supernova. Uh, I often think that if it has gone supernova and we do get to experience what that is in our lifetime, it would be a truly a fundamental change symbolically with regard to the way the sky is represented.